Every mystery begins with a question, a missing person, a forgotten object, a strange event buried in history. Sometimes the answers are hidden, sometimes they're never found, and sometimes the truth is stranger than anything we could imagine. Welcome to the Unexplained Archives. This is a collection of mysteries, crimes, legends, and unexplained stories from around the world. Today's story begins in the Ural Mountains in Russia, February 1959. Nine experienced hikers set out into the wilderness. Trained students and graduates, led by Igor Dyatlov, one of the best in their group. They had done routes like this before. They were never seen alive again. When rescuers found their camp 2 weeks later, what they discovered made no sense. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Someone or several people had slashed through the fabric with a knife and fled into sub zero temperatures in their socks, without coats, without boots. The temperatures that night were around minus 30 degrees Celsius. Their bodies were found scattered across the slope. Some had injuries so severe that investigators compared them to the result of a car crash. One was missing her tongue. No external cause was ever officially confirmed. Much of the investigation remained inaccessible for years, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories that continued long after the Soviet era. And the question that has haunted investigators, hikers, and conspiracy theorists for 60 years is still unanswered. What made nine experienced people flee their tent into the freezing night and never come back? They were young. The oldest was 38. Most were in their 20s. Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, was the group's leader, an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, experienced and well respected. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22 years old, Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, Rustem Slobodin, 23-year-old, and seven others. They had set out on February 1st, 1959, heading for a peak called Ototen. It was a Category 3 difficulty route, the highest classification. They were qualified. They were supposed to check in on February 12th. They didn't. A search party was dispatched. On February 26th, they found the tent. Interestingly, there had originally been 10 members of the expedition. One of them, Yuri Yudin, turned back early because of severe joint pain. It was a decision that almost certainly saved his life. He would spend the rest of his life wondering what happened to his friends. He became the final surviving member of the expedition, dying in 2013 without ever receiving an answer. The tent was partially buried by snow and had collapsed on one side. It had been cut open from the inside. Multiple cuts made in haste. Whatever happened, they needed to get out immediately. Footprints led away from the tent down the slope. Some in socks, some barefoot, some with one boot. They didn't run, the prints were steady, walking. That detail is important. They walked calmly into minus 30-degree temperatures without their gear. The first two bodies were found near a large cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. They had climbed the tree, bark was broken on the branches up to 5 meters high, as if they'd been looking for something or watching something. Their hands were burnt from a fire, it seemed, but the fire had been small, barely enough to provide warmth. Three more bodies were found between the tree and the tent, as if they'd been trying to return. They died of hypothermia. But the last four bodies weren't found until May, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine. And those were the ones that changed everything. Nikolai had a fractured skull. Ludmila had multiple broken ribs, bilateral fractures, both sides of the chest, the kind of force you'd need a car accident or an industrial press to produce. Her tongue and her eyes were missing. Alexander also had broken ribs and a fractured skull. No external wounds, no bruising consistent with the beating. The injuries were internal, caused by enormous compressive force with no obvious external agent. Over the decades, dozens of explanations have been proposed. Some are grounded in science, others belong firmly in the realm of speculation. The first theory, slab avalanche. In 2021, the official Russian investigation concluded the most likely cause was a combination of factors: a small avalanche, or a phenomena called a katabatic wind, which can produce sudden, violent pressure changes. The theory is that the hikers were woken by a sudden threat, a slow movement, or a terrifying sound, and cut their way out in panic. The confusion and disorientation in darkness and blizzard conditions led to fatal decisions. The compressive injuries on the final four could theoretically be caused by snow load if they were buried briefly before managing to move. It's the most scientifically supported explanation, but it doesn't satisfy everyone. The tongue, the eyes, the calm footprints, the burned hands, none of these fit neat. In 2021, researchers revisited the case using advanced computer models. Surprisingly, one of the tools used had originally been developed to simulate snow movement for Disney's Frozen. Researchers continued to recreate the conditions of that night using modern computer models, weather records, satellite topography, and avalanche physics. They reconstructed the slope as it existed in 1959, estimated the weight of accumulated snow, and modeled how a delayed slab avalanche could have behaved after the hikers cut into the hillside to pitch their tent. The results were striking. A relatively small amount of dense, compacted snow, far less dramatic than the enormous avalanches most people imagine, could generate exactly the kind of crushing force found in several of the victims, while leaving surprisingly little obvious evidence behind by the time rescuers arrived weeks later. For many scientists, these simulations present the strongest explanation yet proposed. But like every reconstruction, they answer some questions while raising others. Computer models can estimate how the snow moved. They cannot tell us what the hikers saw, what they heard, or what made them decide that leaving the safety of their tent was the only option. Theory 2: Military testing. The Soviet government was actively testing weapons in the Ural region in 1959. Parachute mines, which detonate at altitude and produce devastating pressure waves, were among them. The internal injuries, no external wounds, but catastrophic internal damage, matched what a pressure detonation might produce. Some researchers believe the group stumbled into an active military test zone, and the Soviet government's classification of the case was not to protect a supernatural secret, but a military one. It's worth noting that no publicly available evidence has ever demonstrated that military weapons testing occurred at the exact campsite that night. The theory remains plausible to some researchers because of the Cold War context and the secrecy surrounding Soviet military projects. But the direct evidence is limited. The infrasound theory is related. Low frequency sound waves produced by certain weapons or atmospheric conditions can cause panic, disorientation, paranoia, and in extreme cases, internal bleeding. The third theory, the unknown compelling force. The Soviet investigators themselves wrote this phrase in their official report. The hikers died as a result of an unknown compelling force. Some researchers take this literally. UFO sightings were reported in the area that night by multiple independent witnesses across the region. Orange orbs in the sky. Similar lights have been reported in the Urals at different times and may have been military flares, atmospheric phenomena, or distant rocket launches. None has ever been conclusively linked to the deaths at Dyatlov Pass. The mystery lies not in the lights themselves, but in whether they mattered at all. The radiation found on some of the clothing has never been fully explained. The missing tongue and eyes, some suggest these were removed post mortem by predators, others unconvinced. The case has never been officially closed to universal satisfaction. 9 people went into the Ural Mountains in February 1959. None of them came back. Their names are on a memorial at the Mikhailovskoye Cemetery in Yekaterinburg. Every year, hikers leave flowers. The pass was officially named Dyatlov Pass in their memory. Whatever happened up there on that February night, whether it was nature, accident, a military experiment, or something we still don't have words for, 9 real people died terrified in the cold. And they deserved a better answer than the ones we have. And that's where the trail goes cold. Whatever the explanation may be, the questions remain. And as long as they do, the story continues. This channel is going to be home to a lot of stories like this one, unsolved, unexplained, but always rooted in real people. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious.